Welcome on into NFL Daily. Matthew Peterson being joined by Trace Gerard as we recap day one of NFL free agency so far. Now, I have full confidence that by the time you're watching this, another signing or two will have been made. But for now, let's catch you guys up to speed on everything that's gone down since the legal tamperings opened at noon Eastern to, as we film this presently, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So we had a handful of some minor-ish level signings being made. Greg the Leg sticking in New York. And then, Trace, we got some bigger money being thrown around. Landon Dickerson, Michael Pittman, Demario Davis.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, these were the early morning moves that came in to kick off the free agency tampering period on this Monday. Michael Pittman, I think that's a really good move to keep him around in Indianapolis. Landon Dickerson has been very effective for the Eagles, and now it feels like he's ready to be a starter now that Jason Kelce has retired. And Demario Davis, I really like the player there. He's aged like a fine wine in New Orleans. He earned a 2-year extension. It's like a restructured extension, if you will, $17.25 million with that $13 million guaranteed. But let's look at Michael Pittman's production. Now, obviously, Anthony Richardson, he didn't get to play the whole season, but with working with Gardner Minshew, who we'll talk about here shortly, put up some pretty good numbers, Petey.
He did indeed. And when you think about the Indianapolis Colts as a franchise, they've never really been one to spend big on wide receivers. They are never afraid to let a guy walk and reset in the draft. Like, the most notable free agent wide receivers they paid or, big contracts given out would be Reggie Wayne and T.Y. Hilton. And I just aged everyone by 15 years saying those names. So it's a new development in Indianapolis, but they're keeping their former second-round pick long-term. Fast forwarding to other signings here. DeAndre Swift was what I am dubbing as the first signing of 2024 NFL free agency, an actual player of note going to a different team. It's a 3-year, $24 million contract that Trace did wonders for running backs across the world. I think DeAndre Swift is going to get mini muffin baskets from every single free agent running back because him setting the bar at $8 million for a guy that's only gone over 1,000 yards once in his NFL career from a rushing standpoint, I mean, that really set up players like Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs nicely. And as for the Bears, they likely ditched their running back committee from last year, which was Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, Deontay Foreman, and I think they now get set for DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson, the second-year man out of Texas, kind of being the 1-2 punch in the Windy City. Now, then Jonathan Grenard.
I was going to say, I think that's a sneaky move for Jonathan Grenard. The Vikings were very active in free agency. The 4-year, $76 million. He's a young player, very productive in Houston last year. Petey, do you think that this was a solid addition for the Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah, when I saw the addition, I kind of wondered, is that money being taken away from the Kirk Cousins fund and being spent on other players, or is that Minnesota telling Kirk Cousins, hey, we're going to be aggressive in this free agency period. Stick around. We're going to have a good team. Ultimately, I think we figured out which one of the two it was. But spending $19 million on a guy that comes off a 12-sack season, I don't think you could be very upset about that move if you're a Vikings fan. I also love the Tony Pollard signing, not for the Titans, but for Tony Pollard, because it was like something straight out of When Harry Met Sally. It was like, DeAndre Swift got 3 years, $24 million. I'll have what he's having. So Tony Pollard comes off a down year with the Dallas Cowboys and then cashes in nicely with Tennessee.
It's a big win for the boys at the running back room. Drew Sample as well, 3-year, $10.5 million deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. And then we'll kick it over to Brandon Jones, a 3-year, $20 million deal. He's joining Sean Payton out in Denver. But Lloyd Cushenberry, I found this one pretty interesting. And, Petey, I know you have some thoughts here. 4 years, $50 million for a guy who, I don't know, was that amazing for Denver last year?
Cushenberry, a third-round pick out of LSU, sucked his first 3 years in Denver, and I don't think anyone's going to say otherwise. Last year, Pro Football Focus ranked him 10th out of 36 qualifying centers. He takes that one good year, and he sets records at the center position in NFL free agency. I think the Titans might have overpaid drastically on both Tony Pollard and Lloyd Cushenberry. Fast forwarding, Dorrance Armstrong, he's going to reunite with his old DC out in DC. No pun intended, as he goes and plays under Dan Quinn yet again. Plenty of other big moves to get to in just a second, but what's the best move from day one of NFL free agency? Trace, value, contract, all things considered, which one do you love the most?
I don't know, a sneaky one that I really like. Again, I'm a big fan of the running backs getting paid this year, so I kind of like the Saquon to the Eagles move. I think that's an interesting addition for the Philadelphia Eagles with a strong offensive line who could use some help on that offensive side of the ball. They were lackluster in the back half of the season. That, for me, is one of the sneaky, really good moves, in my opinion.
My favorite move is actually right here on screen right now. It's Christian Wilkins. I can't stress it enough. You do not find interior pass rushers at 25 years old hitting the market in their prime. They just simply do not escape teams because it's so hard to just find defensive tackles that can get 9 sacks. Those guys don't come around every single year in the draft or free agency. And when you do find one, you'd think you would hold on to him for dear life. Instead, the Dolphins let him test the open market, and now he's a Raider. Gabe Davis, he leaves Buffalo. He gets to have ranch with his wings now as he goes down to Duval County on a 3-year, $39 million contract. Okay, fast forwarding through some other contracts given out so far in day one. Tyler Biadasz, he's also going to go from Dallas to Washington. Jonah Jackson, he goes to the Rams. He helps Matthew Stafford out from the interior. And then we have Trace, another big running back signing, Josh Jacobs, 4-year, $48 million. I'll save the math. That's $12 million a season. And he replaces Aaron Jones, who subsequently got released up in Lambeau.
And here's one thing I want to point out on screen here. The Bryce Huff move for the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, I like the Josh Jacobs deal. I don't think I love the contract for the Packers. Again, pro running back, so I like the contract for Jacobs. But 3 years, $51 million for a guy who was extremely productive, had 10-plus sacks last year for the Jets. He can go and cash in and play alongside a lot of talented veterans on the Eagles' defensive line. Howie Roseman likes building in the trenches and moving outwards. And I think that that's a really good move for the Eagles, as well as Will Lutz. Went to the Jags, then came back and changed his mind, and so he's sticking around with his...
Sip, snap.
Yep, sticking around with his old friend Sean Payton in
One
Denver.
thing I'll add to Bryce Huff, kudos to him. It's the largest contract ever received by a UDFA. So
that's sick.
An awesome story for a guy that worked his way in. I'll also add, Hassan Reddick, you are not an Eagle. I don't see a way that they hold on to Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, and now Bryce Huff. One of those two guys in Sweat and Reddick is getting traded.
To be honest, they could use a little bit of money. And if you want to use or make a little bit of money, you could go to prizepicks.com/CLNS. Plug in promo code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. If you're not familiar with what Prize Picks is, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. And you can win real money in real time. I don't care if you're an NBA, a college football, a NASCAR, esports, women's basketball, cricket, whatever. They got projections for you, and you can go and make some big-time money. I like what you see on screen right here. That Cade Cunningham one, you might be seeing that little red dot and being like, what is that? Well, let me tell you, it's not a red dot. It is a demon pick, meaning it's a little bit harder to hit, but the payout is so much better. Like we said, you have college basketball. We even had NFL combine projections, and you can get started at prizepicks.com/CLNS. Plug in promo code CLNS for a first-time deposit match up to $100. We appreciate Prize Picks for making today's video. All of the information, in case you weren't listening, is in the comment section description of this video because we love you.
Moving along in the chronological order that these signings happened, the biggest one of the day in just terms of overall contract, it's a 4-year, $180 million deal for Kirk Cousins as he leaves the Vikings after 6 seasons, heading down to Atlanta to play with the Falcons. Blockbuster deal. The Falcons have been searching for a quarterback ever since Matt Ryan went to Indianapolis, and they do not F around here. They go and get their guy, and they pay him handsomely. Now, 4 years, $180 million. That's a lot of money to be given to a near 36-year-old quarterback off an Achilles injury. It's a roll of the dice. There's no question about it. But if you trust Western medicine and you feel like he's going to make a full recovery, Trace, I think this is going to be a great move for Atlanta.
Absolutely. I also, like I said earlier, I think the Saquon Barkley deal for the Philadelphia Eagles is a really good addition. They have a much better offensive line than the Giants did. They have a much better overall team than the Giants did. So I think that the pressure for Barkley will be a little bit less than it was in the Big Apple. Antonio Gibson, another running back, benefiting a little bit from that high market. That's all these guys are getting paid. 3 years, $11.25 million with $5.3 guaranteed. And Sean Murphy-Bunting, he's leaving. He was with Tennessee for some time. Now he is with the Arizona Cardinals. 3 years, $25.5 million deal. Vikings were active today,
dude.
Peter.
How about
very active?
The Dolphins made some additions and had some subtractions. They lost a lot of their pass rush. I don't quite know what Greer is doing in South Beach, losing Christian Wilkins and Andrew Van Ginkel. Moving along here, we got Robert Hunt. He will be going to protect Bryce Young in Carolina. 5-year, $100 million contract. A huge spending item for an interior offensive lineman. Bilal Nichols, one-time Chicago Bear, then Las Vegas Raider. He goes down to the desert on a nice 3-year, $21 million contract. I like that signing for Jonathan Gannon. And Jeff Okudah, at one point, the 3rd overall pick in the draft, he signs his first contract in free agency. It is with Houston, 1 year, $4.75 million. So, as we are watching right now, I'm sure this is subject to change, but as you are watching, who's the best free agent left? I'll say Danielle Hunter. Trace?
I mean, it's hard to disagree. Yeah, it's hard to disagree in terms of, best overall player. Like, I really think that Ryan Tannehill is not the best player, but he might be a player that could be signed soon for one of these, late players. I do like Marquise Brown, to be quite honest. I think that he is an interesting, tantalizing player in the right situation. But Danielle Hunter, for me, is clearly the number one defensive end and free agent left available.
Moving along, Xavier McKinney, he gets paid by the Pack, 4-year, $68 million contract to leave Big Blue after the Packers lost Darnell Savage in free agency. Grover Stewart, he stays put in Indianapolis, re-signs 3-year, $39 million contract, one of the better interior defensive linemen in football. We got Geno Stone, Trace, one of the better safeties in football last year, and he wasn't even a starter. That's an all-time steal by Cincinnati.
I was going to say, the interception machine in Baltimore might be trying to stick it to his former team in the division by going over to Cincinnati to team up with a lot of talent like Trey Hendrickson on the defensive side of the ball. Gus Edwards also has a new team with the Los Angeles Chargers. I think the worst contract of the day for a team.
Okay.
2 years, $25 million for Gardner Minshew. Because
you think it's an overpay?
I think it's an overpay. I really do.
I think Gardner Minshew is a good quarterback. I think he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in football.
See, I think he's a good quarterback, but if you're going to pay that guy that kind of money to compete with Aiden O'Connell to be the QB1, just feels like it's a lot of money. I'm going to give credit where it's due. Gardner Minshew is a very fun player. At the bare minimum, Las Vegas is getting an interesting and entertaining player that will have some fun in Las Vegas. I think he'll do a good job embodying the Raider Nation and the Raider way, if you will. And he has shown some flashes and, kept the Colts playoff hopes a little bit alive throughout the Anthony Richardson injury.
We have Leonard Floyd. He's going out west yet again, this time with the San Francisco 49ers. 2 years, $20 million contract.
That's a great deal.
Feels like that might put a hammer in the Chase Young coming back. Looks like they found Nick Bosa's running mate. Chidobe Awuzie, he's actually going to follow his former coach, Brian Callahan, down to Tennessee on a 3-year, $36 million contract after Sean Murphy-Bunting left in free agency. So, before we get to the remaining signings here, make sure to subscribe because, boys and girls, this is just day one. We're just getting started. More signings, more trades, more rumors, and all of it's free. So make sure to join us here at Chat Sports for the best free NFL YouTube content.
Now, Petey, I know you got some thoughts about Anthony Walker and Zadarius Smith. I personally think that the Browns keeping Zadarius Smith is a good move for Cleveland and Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. But in terms of losing Anthony Walker, do you think it was worth that to keep Zadarius Smith?
Anthony Walker, a captain, a leader of this defense, the green dot in the middle. He was awesome when he was playing. The issue was the injuries over his time in Cleveland just could not fade away. And ultimately, the Browns made a decision. We're not going to re-sign a guy who we can't rely on to play 17 games. So I can understand why they moved on from Anthony Walker. As for the Zadarius Smith re-signing, huge fan of this. He was one of the better edge rushers in generating pressures last season in the NFL. The sacks weren't quite there, just 5.5, but I view pressures and sacks kind of like hard hit average and whatnot in baseball. Sometimes you're going to have a great hit that's just going to go right to the center fielder. And I felt like that happened a lot for Zadarius Smith last year. I think the sacks will return in 2024. The Browns also brought back Maurice Hurst on their defensive line. Mack Wilson goes to the desert. Marcus Davenport is making his rounds in the NFC North. He goes from Minnesota to Detroit.
And this is a guy who the Saints traded up to go and draft. They actually passed on Lamar Jackson to draft Marcus Davenport. The best season he's had was 9 sacks. So I think that Dan Campbell is getting a player with some upside. He's just had some trouble in the past few years staying on the field and staying healthy. Full transparency, a couple seasons ago, he had more games suspended than sacks logged, which isn't great. That being said, it is a move that I think that the Lions needed to make. Dan Campbell wanting to bring in some of these some talent to the defensive side of the ball. And we did have a trade that was pretty interesting. The Buccaneers received a 3rd-round pick, and the Lions and Dan Campbell got 2 6th-round picks and quarterback Carlton Davis. Petey, what do you think about that move?
Carlton Davis, I think, is one of the more underappreciated cornerbacks in football. He's one of the top 10 highest paid, but he kind of flies underneath the radar when you start talking about the best corners in the game. The worst kept secret this offseason was Detroit needed a corner. They decided to dish out some draft compensation now instead of waiting until April to go find a cornerback. So I think it's a good fit for both sides. Juwan Jennings should have been Super Bowl MVP, graduated from one of the best universities in the country. He stays in San Francisco. And then Brian Burns, traded for a 2nd and a 5th to the Giants, where he would sign a 5-year, $150 million contract. I think both sides are losers in this trade, and I'll tell you why. The Panthers are losers because they held on too long and they could have gotten multiple firsts, and instead they get a 2nd and a 5th. I think the Giants are losers because they're paying a guy who's had 1 season with over 10 sacks, $30 million on average. I just don't quite see the extreme hype for Brian Burns. He's a good football player. But $30 million goes to special players that just don't come around every year. I don't quite see the love for Brian Burns that the Giants had.
Now, Dan Quinn did bring in Austin Eckler, the dual-threat running back from the Los Angeles Chargers, 2 years, up to $11.43 million. And Jermaine Illuminor, friend of the show here at Chat Sports, he's leaving Vegas, moving up to the Big Apple, trying to protect Daniel Jones or whoever the heck their next quarterback's going to be. And we do have some more names to get to. Ronald Darby signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars, 2 years, up to $10 million. And Petey, Azeez Al-Shaair signing with the Texans, 3-year, $34 million. I feel like that's a really good contract for a good player, and I like that fit in Houston.
He was. It is a good fit. I believe he was with the 49ers where he played under DeMeco Ryan. So you can kind of see the reunion writing on the wall right there. The Patriots bring back one of their own offensive linemen. It's a 3-year, $57 million contract for Big Mike, and I like this re-signing for New England. Whoever's playing quarterback, they're going to want to have some experience in front of them and not have a bunch of trial-by-fire rookie offensive linemen. So New England keeps a part of their better offensive line intact. Now, make sure to type me if you have made it all the way to the end of the video. This is our way of knowing who the real MVPs are of the channel, who the real ones are. So if you're still watching, you're still rolling with us, type me in the comments below.